Emma meets Karen.
The morning our church lost power during Sunday service, my boss stood on the stage and blamed me in front of almost 300 people. I was sitting in the second row when every light suddenly went dark. The microphone stopped working, the large screens went black, and the air conditioning system fell silent. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then people began whispering. Children started crying in the back rows. Several older members used their phone flashlights to find their way toward the exits. Our pastor, John, stepped away from the microphone and tried to calm everyone without any sound equipment. My boss, Mike, walked onto the stage with his phone light shining under his face. "This is what happens when the office staff fail to pay the bills on time," he announced. His voice carried through the silent room. Then he looked directly at me. "Sarah, you were responsible for the electricity account." Every face turned in my direction. I felt heat rise into my cheeks, but I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I simply opened the folder on my lap and placed one printed email on top. Mike thought I was embarrassed. He had no idea that I had been waiting for that exact moment. I had worked as the church office manager for 6 years. I handled donations, invoices, payroll records, room bookings, and most of the paperwork that kept the church running. Mike had been hired as the operations director 11 months earlier. When he first arrived, everyone loved him. He was friendly, confident, and always ready with a big new idea. He talked about modernizing the church, increasing attendance, and turning our old building into the most impressive worship center in the city. Our church was in a small town outside Nashville, Tennessee. It was not wealthy, but the members were generous. Many of them had attended for decades. Some families gave money even when they had very little for themselves. That was why I took every church dollar seriously. Mike did not. During his first month, he ordered new office furniture without asking the finance team. During his second month, he hired a marketing company owned by one of his friends. During his third month, he replaced our working sound system because he said it looked outdated. Whenever I questioned an expense, he smiled and told me not to worry. "You focus on paperwork," he said. "I will focus on growth." At first, I believed he was careless. Then I began to suspect that he was doing something much worse. It started with a payment request for $12,000. The invoice came from a company called Bright Star Media. It claimed the company had created online advertisements, social media videos, and a complete church growth plan. I had never seen any advertisements. I had never received any videos. There was no growth plan attached to the invoice. I emailed Mike and asked for proof of the work. He walked into my office 10 minutes later. "Why are you holding up my payment?" he asked. "I need documents showing what the company provided. You do not need to review every decision I make. I am required to keep records for every large payment." His face tightened. "Bright Star did the work. Pay them. I need supporting documents first." Mike leaned over my desk. "Sarah, I am your supervisor. When I approve something, you process it." I looked at him calmly. "The finance policy requires 2 signatures for any payment over $5,000. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he straightened his jacket and smiled. "Fine. I will get Pastor John to sign it." He left my office and returned 20 minutes later with John's signature. I processed the payment because the policy had been followed, but I saved a copy of the invoice and every email connected to it. 2 weeks later, another invoice arrived from Bright Star Media. This one was for $9,000. The description said Community Outreach Consulting. Again, there were no reports, contracts, or records. When I searched the company online, I found a basic website created only 3 months earlier. It had no staff page, no office address, and no examples of previous work. The registered owner was a man named David Miller. Mike's full name was Michael David Miller. That could have been a coincidence, but I checked the address listed in the state business records. It matched the address of Mike's older brother, David. I sat at my desk staring at the screen. Mike was sending church money to his own family. I could have gone straight to Pastor John, but I knew Mike would claim that Bright Star was a real company doing legitimate work. Without stronger proof, it would become my word against his. So I waited. I followed every payment. I saved every invoice. I printed every message. I also kept a private timeline on a flash drive that stayed locked in my home safe. Mike became more confident as the months passed. He convinced the church board to approve a major renovation project. He promised that a new stage, coffee area, children's wing, and digital media room would attract younger families. The original budget was $150,000. Mike said private donors had already promised most of the money. That was not true. I knew because I tracked every donation. Only $48,000 had been raised. When I pointed this out during a staff meeting, Mike laughed. "The rest is coming," he said. "Do we have written pledges?" Several people spoke to me privately. "Can you give me their names so I can record the pledges?" Some donors want to remain anonymous. Pastor John looked uncomfortable. Mike quickly changed the subject. A week later, construction began. Walls were knocked down. The children's classrooms were closed. The church borrowed temporary trailers for Sunday school. Dust covered the hallways, and loud equipment ran during the week. Then the bills started arriving. $20,000 for demolition, $32,000 for electrical work, $18,000 for custom lighting, $26,000 for design services. Every invoice came from a different company, but several used the same mailing address. That address belonged to a small office building rented by Mike's brother. I checked the phone numbers. 3 of the companies had the same voicemail greeting. I checked the signatures. 2 contracts appeared to have been signed by the same person using different names. I kept everything. Meanwhile, Mike continued spending money we did not have. He purchased a large video wall for the stage. He ordered expensive cameras for online services. He hired another friend as a media consultant. He even signed a lease for a church bus without board approval. The church bank account dropped lower every week. Our normal bills began falling behind. I warned Mike several times. "We do not have enough money to cover payroll and the construction payments," I told him. "Move money from the emergency fund. The emergency fund is restricted. Then use the missions account. That money was donated for overseas projects. Nobody will care as long as we replace it later. I will not move restricted donations without written approval." His face turned red. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "I am protecting the church. You are protecting your little filing system." He walked out and slammed my door. The next morning, he removed my access to the church's main bank account. He said it was part of a security update. I knew it was not. From that point forward, Mike approved payments directly through online banking. I could still see the monthly statements, but I could no longer stop anything. I sent Pastor John a written warning. I explained that the construction budget had been exceeded, restricted funds were at risk, and several vendors appeared connected to Mike's family. John asked me to meet him in his office. He looked exhausted when I arrived. "Sarah, I know you are trying to help," he said, "but Mike says you have been resisting every change he makes."
"This is not about change.
"The numbers do not match." He showed the board reports saying the project is fully funded. "Those reports are false." John rubbed his forehead. "That is a serious accusation. I can show you the bank statements." "Mike says the missing donations are still being processed." "That does not make sense." John sighed. "Please give him a little more time. We cannot create a public scandal while the church is under construction." I understood what he meant. He was afraid. Attendance was already falling because of the mess. Families were frustrated by the closed classrooms. The church could not survive another crisis. Mike knew that fear protected him. He began telling staff members that I was negative and difficult. He said I was jealous because he had more authority. He even claimed that I did not support the church's future. Several people stopped speaking to me in the hallways. One afternoon, Lisa, the children's director, came into my office and closed the door. "Mike told us you caused the construction delays," she said. "He told the contractors not to provide paperwork. He also said you lost several invoices." I opened a cabinet and showed her 3 organized folders. "Every invoice is here." Lisa looked shocked. "Why is he saying that?" "Because he needs someone to blame." She sat down across from me. "Is the church in trouble?" I hesitated before answering.
"Yes."
"How bad?" "Worse than most people know." She looked toward the closed door. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to keep records." That answer confused her, but it was the safest plan. If I exposed Mike too early, he might destroy evidence or convince the board that I was lying. I needed him to make his actions impossible to deny. Then the church received a final notice from the electric company. The account was almost $23,000 behind. I found the notice in a pile of mail Mike had removed from my office. I immediately emailed him, Pastor John, and the finance chair, Mark. I wrote that the electricity would be disconnected within 10 days unless payment was made. Mike replied to everyone, "Payment has already been scheduled. Sarah is using outdated information." I called the electric company. No payment was scheduled. I sent another email with the account representative's name and the exact balance. Mike replied only to me, "Stop creating panic." I answered, "Please confirm in writing when the bill will be paid." He never responded. 3 days later, I learned why the account remained unpaid. Mike had transferred $25,000 from the operating account to Bright Star Media. That payment left less than $6,000 in the bank. I printed the transaction. I printed the unpaid electric notice. I printed his email claiming payment had been scheduled. Then I waited. I did not want the church to lose power. I begged Pastor John to call an emergency board meeting. He agreed, but Mike postponed it twice, claiming several board members were unavailable. On Saturday evening, I checked the electric account again. The balance was still unpaid. I knew the power would probably be disconnected the next morning. I sent one final email to every board member. I attached the warning notice, the bank balance, and Mike's payment to his brother's company. Only Mark replied. He wrote, "We will address this after service." Mike must have believed he could survive one more day. He was wrong. At 10:17 on Sunday morning, the lights went out. When Mike stood on the stage and blamed me, I knew he had finally made the mistake I needed. But that was not the end of it. 3 months after Mike pleaded guilty, I received a call from a woman named Rachel. She introduced herself as the office manager of a church in Kentucky. Mike had worked there several years before coming to us. "I saw the news report," she said. "There is something you need to know." My stomach tightened. Rachel explained that money had gone missing during a renovation project at her church too. At the time, nobody could prove what happened. Records had disappeared, invoices were incomplete, and several payments had been made to companies that closed soon afterward. "Mike resigned before the board finished reviewing everything," she said. "He told everyone he needed to move closer to family." "Did you report it?" "Our pastor decided there was not enough evidence. He did not want the church's name in the news." That sounded painfully familiar. Rachel still had copies of several old invoices. She emailed them to me while we were speaking. The moment I opened the first attachment, I recognized the format. Same font, same payment descriptions, same vague language. The company names were different, but one address matched an office used by Mike's brother. I sent everything to the investigator handling our case. Within days, detectives contacted Rachel's church. What started as one fraud investigation expanded into several churches across 3 states. Mike had not created his scheme after joining us. He had been perfecting it for years. He moved from church to church, gained the trust of leadership, pushed for building projects, hired companies connected to his brother, and left before anyone understood what had happened. Each church believed it was an isolated bookkeeping problem. None of them realized they were part of a pattern. Investigators discovered that Mike targeted churches with older pastors, loyal members, and limited financial oversight. He knew that people in churches often avoided conflict. He understood that words like trust, unity, forgiveness, and loyalty could be used to silence anyone asking difficult questions. That angered me more than the stolen money. He had used people's faith against them. The new evidence increased Mike's sentence. His brother also faced additional charges after investigators found more fraudulent companies connected to him. When the final hearing took place, several people from our church attended. I did not plan to speak, but the prosecutor asked whether I wanted to give a statement. I stood before the judge with my hands shaking. Mike sat beside his lawyer, wearing a plain gray suit. He looked smaller than I remembered. There was no stage, no microphone, and no crowd waiting to applaud him. I looked directly at him. "You did not only steal money," I said. "You stole people's trust. You took donations from families who believed they were helping children, supporting missionaries, and protecting their church. You knew many of those people could not afford to lose what they gave, but you took it anyway. Mike stared at the table. You believed nobody would question you, because you worked inside a church. You believed kindness made people weak. You were wrong. The judge sentenced him to several years in prison and ordered him to repay as much money as possible. When the hearing ended, Mike turned toward me. For one moment, I expected anger. Instead, he looked afraid. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you destroyed my life." I stopped walking. "No, Mike. I documented what you did. You destroyed your own life." His lawyer pulled him away before he could answer. Outside the courthouse, Rachel was waiting for me. We had spoken many times by phone, but that was the first time we met in person. She hugged me tightly. "I wish I had done what you did," she said. "You did what you could with what you had." I stayed quiet. "So, did I at first?" Rachel shook her head. "You kept the receipts." That sentence stayed with me. A few weeks later, Pastor John asked me to help create a financial protection guide for smaller churches. We worked with accountants, lawyers, and church leaders from across Tennessee. The guide explained simple rules that could prevent fraud. No one person should control donations, invoices, and payments. Family connections to vendors must be disclosed. Large expenses must be reviewed by more than one person. Bank statements must be sent directly to someone outside the daily payment process. Every project must have a written budget. Every invoice must match real work. We also included a section about leadership behavior. A person who becomes angry when asked for records is not protecting the church. A person who calls accountability disloyalty is not protecting the church. A person who demands trust while refusing transparency is asking for control. The guide was shared with hundreds of churches. Several leaders contacted us afterward to say they had discovered suspicious payments or weak policies before serious damage occurred. For the first time, I felt that something good had grown from what happened. Our own church continued rebuilding. Attendance slowly returned. Some families never came back, and I understood why. Trust takes years to build and only seconds to destroy. Pastor John changed too. He stopped making decisions alone. He invited questions during board meetings and made sure nobody was punished for raising concerns. One evening, he came into my office carrying a box. "I found this in the storage room," he said. Inside were several files from Mike's first months at the church. I opened one folder and found an early proposal for Bright Star Media. At the bottom of the final page was Pastor John's signature. He looked embarrassed. I signed it without reading the attachments. I studied the document. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I need to stop pretending Mike fooled everyone except me." I gave him authority he did not earn. I ignored warning signs because he made my job easier. I closed the folder. "You admitted that publicly." I apologized publicly. "That is not the same as understanding it." He sat across from me. I wanted the church to grow quickly. Mike promised numbers, attention, and a building people would notice. I cared too much about how successful we looked. That does not make you responsible for his crimes. No, but it made me easier to manipulate. It was the most honest conversation we had ever shared. John remained pastor, but he became a better one. He stopped chasing dramatic growth and focused on the people already inside the church. The coffee area Mike had planned was eventually completed, but not as a polished business space. Volunteers built simple wooden tables. Members donated chairs. Teenagers painted the walls. Every Sunday morning, people sat there sharing breakfast, helping new families, and organizing support for anyone struggling. The room cost less than one of Mike's fake invoices. It became one of the busiest spaces in the building. A year after the power outage, the church held a special service. The new electrical system had been fully paid for, the final construction debt had been cleared, and the emergency fund had been restored. Mark stood on the stage and presented the annual financial report. Every dollar was explained. Every account was listed. Every major expense included supporting documents that members could review. When he finished, the room applauded. Not because the numbers were impressive, because the truth was visible. Then John invited me onto the stage. I had not been told that would happen. He handed me a framed page. It was a copy of the first warning email I had sent about the unpaid electricity bill. Below it, someone had added a small metal plate that read, "The truth does not fear the light." I nearly laughed when I saw it. "This is the strangest award anyone has ever received," I said. The congregation laughed with me. Then I looked across the room. Susan was sitting with her husband. Lisa was surrounded by children from the new classrooms. Mark was holding the completed financial report. Rachel had driven from Kentucky to attend. I thought about the morning the church went dark. At the time, it felt like everything was collapsing. The lights had failed. The bank account was empty. The building was unfinished. Our leader was standing on the stage blaming me. But sometimes a collapse reveals what has been hidden behind the walls. Mike believed darkness would protect him. He believed confusion would make people accept the easiest explanation. He believed that if he spoke confidently enough, nobody would check the facts. He underestimated the power of a dated email. He underestimated the value of a bank statement. He underestimated a quiet woman with organized folders. After the service, a young volunteer named Emma approached me. She had recently started helping in the office. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "How did you stay calm when Mike blamed you in front of everyone?" "I was not calm." "You looked calm." "That is different." She smiled. "I think I would have shouted. I wanted to shout many times." "Why did you wait?" "Because anger tells people how you feel. Evidence shows them what happened." Emma nodded slowly. "So the receipts mattered more than the argument."
Exactly.
A few months later, Emma began studying accounting at a local college. She continued volunteering with us and eventually became my assistant. I taught her everything I had learned. Never approve a payment without proof. Never allow friendship to replace procedure. Never assume a respected title guarantees an honest person. Never delete an uncomfortable email. And never let anyone convince you that asking questions is an act of betrayal. Several years have passed since that Sunday. The church is still standing. The children's wing is full every week. The missions account supports projects exactly as donors intended. The finance committee rotates members, so no small group holds control for too long. Every new employee receives training about fraud prevention and financial responsibility. As for Mike, he sent me one letter from prison.
He said he had changed.
He said he wanted forgiveness. He said he hoped I could remember the good things he had tried to do. I read the letter twice. Then I placed it in a folder. I did not reply. Forgiveness did not require me to pretend the damage never happened. It did not require me to restore trust. It did not require me to erase the truth. Mike had spent years believing that people would forgive him before they held him accountable. That belief allowed him to keep hurting churches. Real forgiveness could only begin after honesty. And honesty was the one thing he had avoided until there was nowhere left to hide. I still keep the original receipts in a locked cabinet. Every invoice, every email, every transfer, every warning. Not because I enjoy remembering what happened. I keep them because they remind me how close we came to losing everything. They remind me that dishonest people often depend on decent people feeling too uncomfortable to speak. They remind me that silence can look like peace while damage grows underneath it. Most of all, they remind me that the truth does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it sits quietly in a folder. Sometimes it waits inside an email inbox. Sometimes it appears as a date, a signature, or a number that does not match. Mike crashed our church because he thought nobody would stop him. I let him believe that. I let him stand on the stage.
I let him point at me.
I let him tell one final lie in front of everyone. Then I opened the folder. And one receipt at a time, I took his entire story apart.